Hello and welcome to this episode of Center Stage. Today I'm joined by Professor Olivier Roy, a renowned professor in the field of Orientalism. He teaches currently at the European University Institute of Florence, the author of several renowned books, including The Failure of Islamism and Global or Globalized Islam. Professor Olivier, thank you very much for joining us on Center Stage.
Thank you for inviting me.
Professor, I'd like to start by speaking about the term of Orientalism. What started off as a definition for studying the Orient from a Western perspective, countries and powers that were colonizing much of the global South was redefined, particularly through studies and the writings of the most renowned of whom was by the late Edward Said. Now is a term that is used to refer how the West views the global South, particularly the Arab and Muslim world, and in fact has led to shaping a lot of policies that impact millions of people around the world. What does that term Orientalism mean to you?
Orientalism, predates, in fact, colonialism. At the end of the 18th century, there was a construction of this specific field of studies. The universities are mainly at the different academies in Western Europe. And the first Orientalists were, in fact, admirative of Islam, of the Muslim civilization, and so. So Orientalism is first some sort of an erudition, of a knowledge, but a knowledge mainly based on books, writings, an abstract knowledge, not of a society, but of what was perceived as a civilization. But from the beginning, this term of civilization used to refer to something which was attributed to the past. The idea that the Muslim world specifically was missed, the progress, missed secularization, and was a bit backward. So there was this mixing of intellectual knowledge, of literature, of religion, and so, and this representation of holistic and backward civilization, which was unable to challenge the West.
An objective look into history would see that much of modern day science and maths actually was born out of Muslim lands, from Arab and Muslim scholars. The idea that some sort of savior or intellectual enlightenment was required to the Muslim world and the Arab world is a misrepresentation, really, of the situation at the time.
Yeah, the idea that in the Western Middle Age, the Muslim civilization was higher, was more developed. That's not something which was recognized at the time. But the idea was, now it's done. Now it's the West, which embodies knowledge, sciences, and progress. The idea was that the Muslim civilization was something of the past, very interesting past, but of the past. And the idea was that there was no dynamics inside the Muslim world towards progress, knowledge, sciences. So the idea was that the West has to teach, now it's the turn of the West, to teach the East about science and progress and secularization. Never forget this important term, which at that time was connected with the very concept of progress.
I think the debate is open, and we can go through many different examples of both universities, institutions, academics, and other leading entities within the Arab and Muslim world that even in the kind of declining era of those nations still existed, be it in Cairo, be it in Baghdad and other places. And that was never really the main push for Orientalists to intervene within the Arab and Muslim world as much as it was through secularization.
Yeah, the idea that progress means secularization, or that progress more exactly supposes previous secularization, was shared by many people, by everybody in the West, but also by many leaders in the Muslim world. That will lead to Kemal Atatürk, for instance, in Turkey. So many authoritarian leaders brought the idea that we should build from scratch in the East a model of university borrowed from the West by ignoring what was already existing, ignoring the scientists, ignoring the intellectuals, ignoring the ulamas who were existing, who had the knowledge, who were teaching, etc. All that was considered as backward. It was not necessarily destroyed, but the idea was the East has to start its process of progress from scratch by not ignoring, but by just dismissing the traditional culture and the traditional forms of teaching and transmitting knowledge.
Was this really an academic, intellectual school of thought that secularization is the best thing for the Arab and Muslim world, or was it a means to an end, which is the ends being colonization?
Both. I would say in the second part of the 19th century, the dominant school of thought in the West was secularization. The idea that the big victory of the West was to have secularized itself, and then the idea was we should export secularization. But what did happen is that the colonial authorities, at the beginning, they didn't care about the culture of the colonized country. The French conquest of Algeria was, I would say, purely destructive. The idea that it's not an interesting society, there is nothing interesting. But then the colonial administrations realized that Orientalism might be a tool of control. That is better, to, for instance, to create in Algeria faculty of Islamic law, managed by the French, of course, by French lawyers and so. It was better than just to ignore the traditions. So we have this process of reconstructing and controlling some traditions, but in the sense, of course, of ensuring and rooting the colonial domination. The British did the same in India, the French in Algeria. There was some differences between the different colonial powers, but all the colonial powers did mobilize their own Orientalists in order to provide the colonial administration with tools, sophisticated tools of controlling the societies.
So, and here I want to jump from that history to today's world, whereby we view or we see similar narratives being constructed by Western powers in order to dictate to other countries who is good and who is not, what is moral and what is not, but not based on a universal code of conduct, or not based even on something that is applicable to all, but something that is literally tailored to their own interests. For example, we look at the concept of universal human rights. And all you got to do is look at the genocide in Gaza and compare it to the war between Russia and Ukraine. And you see how the idea of Orientalism is still very much prevalent in how the rhetoric of politics and the policies of politicians and countries exist.
The theory of human rights was set up as a universal system. So the idea was not it's a Western system. The idea was it should be a universal system. But then it was used as, I would say, a way to export the Western vision by not just ignoring local traditions, local cultures, and local religions, but by considering this local tradition and religion as in opposition with the universal theory of the human rights. So that was a shift to construct something which was specifically Western and to turn it into something which is supposed to be universal and should be imposed because it's supposed to be universal.
Why do you say it was specifically Western? Why is human rights specifically Western?
Because it was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was declared in 1947 by the first session of the United Nations, which at that time were purely Western. The idea is only the West has been able to construct a universal system of human rights. So,
That's the idea, but the reality is not the case. Because,
of course. But it was this idea which pushed, Western intellectuals, both from right and left, to consider that they are holier than the others, that they are better, that they embody universal principles, while the others do not embody just local values and traditions.
Why is there, in your view, why till today there isn't an introspective, self-critical look within Western societies of what Western ideals are, and actually, if in fact they're the best?
First, there is a kind of schizophrenia here, that the internal problems of the West is a problem for the West and should not be debated, as universal issues, while the problems, domestic problems of other cultures should be put under scrutiny by the Western standards. So, and in this sense, yes, there is an absolute dissymmetry. The traditional Orientalism was not considering, Islam as something specific. The idea was there is a Muslim culture, a Muslim civilization. But since the 70s, there is a shift in the Orientalist vision of the East, from the West to the East, the idea that Islam is the problem. Islam is at the core, of any culture in Middle East, and that Islam is a problem. Islam is against, by definition, human rights, women's rights, etc. So every time the newspapers, and even the public opinion, let's say, perceives something as typically embodying Islamic norms, like the veil, like the ban on alcohol, it's condemned, as a kind of, let's say, totalitarianism, authoritarianism, a lack of human rights, etc. So we have the shift from culture to religion in the vision, in the Orientalist vision of the West towards the Middle East. And now, I would say, this Islamization, I would say, from the West, the Islamization of the representation is, for me, the big problem now.
You touched on the, if indirectly, this idea of clash of civilizations, the theory that Samuel Huntington put out in his book. When you look at the biggest crises that we have seen, and when you look at the most death that we've seen, as we're seeing now in the first time in the history of mankind, a live stream genocide, it is actually being perpetrated against the Muslims. I want to propose a different theory to you, that the clash of civilizations is imminent, not because there is a problem with Islam, but because there is a certain powers that are adamant on trying to destroy and eradicate Muslims and Islam.
Islam is used as a pretext for demonizing Muslim societies, countries, and states. That's very clear. From an objective point of view, you are right. The problem is why? Why it's Islam now, which is seen by the West as the main threat. We are no more really in a Huntingtonian perspective. For Huntington, culture were based on religion, but the main issue was culture. Now, the main issue from the West is religion. We have now, identity politics now are superseding the universalist discourse of the West. And that is a very interesting change. President Trump is adopting identity politics discourse, which is new in the USA. Until now, until Joe Biden, the idea was the USA are embodying human rights, they are working to establish peace for the whole world, they are the best in the world. And now the discourse is, we don't care about you. We just want to protect us and to keep the lead, to keep the leadership, but for our own interests. So we have a shift here in the perception in the West of what is culture and what is religion, and specifically what is Islam.
Does the West not realize, or does it realize it just doesn't care, and that the huge discrepancy between the way in which its rhetoric is presented with regards to when it's talking at the other, whereas when it's talking within itself, that really makes it lose all sorts of credibility, both intellectually, politically, and so forth?
I would say most of our leaders and the political leaders don't care, They use the debate on religion and Islam for internal reasons, for domestic reasons, and they don't care about the impact of such discourses on the societies of the Middle East. That's the big problem. We are now first in some sort of a schizophrenia. We don't care about the others. And in national egoism. This is reinforced by immigration. I would say that now the debate on Islam is no more centered on Middle East. It's centered on immigration. What is the room for Muslims in the West? And the answer is very different from one country to the others. You have countries like the USA, which are open to, I would say, some sort of a freedom of religion. Okay. And you have other countries, like France, who are secularized, politically secularized. And so they see any manifestation of Islam faith, of religion, as a threat to the national unity. That's the big problem.
The irony being that they claim they tried to export their ideals, which were based partially on pluralism, to the Arab and Muslim world. So surely a society that is built on the concept of pluralism should be welcoming diversity rather than shunning it or trying to find ways to ship it to Rwanda or to other places around the world, no?
Now the big word of the different populism is not pluralism. It's identity. It's exclusion. All our constitutions are based on this idea of inclusion, but most of our politics are based on exclusion. Hence the tensions we have. We have a big shift here, I would say, for the last 20 or 30 years.
Maybe the failure for Western society's implementation of the idea of inclusion and the shift towards exclusion is because that inclusion was not based on a unified ideal or principle that is not man-made. What I mean by this, from a Muslim perspective, religion plays a core, central, fundamental foundation for society, for laws, and so forth, and therefore it is based on interpretation of that text, but the text doesn't change, and there are clear guidelines. From a Jewish perspective, for argument's sake, there are the commandments from other religions. The fact that Western societies try to build a society that is not founded on a sacrosanct basis meant that there is no boundaries to it, and therefore the moment it collapses or the moment they choose for it that they no longer want it, they can change it.
Exactly. But the first enemy of this vision of man-made society was Christianity. The French Revolution was strongly opposed to the Catholic Church, not necessarily to the idea of religion, but to the Catholic Church. And the conflict between the Republic and the Catholic Church lasted, I would say, until the mid-19th century. People stopped to go to church. People stopped to go to enlist into the seminaries. And so we had a slow but continuous decline of religious practices. So religion, Christianity as a religion, was no more an issue. But the Pope continued to say, all the popes continued to say, the law of God is above the law of man. You know, by definition, a Pope cannot say we should first obey human law before following God. That's impossible. Simply, their voices was not heard because the Christian constituency was in decline. And suddenly, we have a new constituency, Muslim. They are more or less believers, it doesn't matter. Many Muslims want to integrate, they want to be citizens, most of the Muslims, but they want to enjoy freedom of religion, which means that they want their religious practices to be visible. They don't want to keep religion just at home. You know. They want to be allowed to show that they are Muslims, to wear veil, to have halal food, etc. So they want to enjoy what is defined as religious freedom by our own constitution. And the answer is no. That's the big issue now. So the big issue is freedom of religion. In Europe, especially in France, what does it mean?
What if there is an even bigger issue, which is even the very premise of Western society, which is meant to be democracy, that in itself is under threat, not because Muslims don't believe in it, but because the French or the British themselves don't believe in it. And what I mean by this is the following. The same way we saw France or the UK renegade on the support for democracy when Islamist politicians came to power, be it in Egypt or in Gaza or in other places, what happens tomorrow if the population of France becomes somewhat more, a majority Muslim, or even if they choose to vote in a Muslim official on a very senior level? Can you confidently say that, whether you want to call it deep state or whether you want to call it intellectuals or whatever you want to call it, that they won't find a justification to then do away with democracy?
First, we are already doing away with democracy. The populist movements are not democratic movements. So it's not just an issue of freedom of religion. It's a crisis of the democratic system. If the democratic system were really entrenched, in our contemporary societies, the issue of religious Islamic party would not be relevant. Most of our constitutions prevent, the construction of a religious state, whatever the religion. So now we have Rassemblement National in France, we have AfD in Germany. They are the parties who criticize liberal democracy, and they are on the rise. I don't see any rise of an identity political parties starting from the former migrants. No, I don't see that. What all my research is on the second generation and third generation shows that they want to have their voice, of course, they want to play a role, but they believe in democracy.
If we were to take the genocide in Gaza now, take the last general elections in the United Kingdom, even in other places, by the way, in Europe, but let's just take this, for example. There was clear lobbying around independent candidates, 5 of whom won, who stood on one simple ticket, end the genocide in Gaza, which resonated primarily with Muslim constituents, but also with other immigrants, right? What was the counter to them? The counter was identity politics. These are immigrants. They don't care about UK values. All they care about is things abroad and so forth. And this is where the clash is, where I'm saying the clash isn't a clash of civilizations that is happening and unraveling and will continue. It is a clash of principles.
I would say it's a fight between identity and principles. And identity is a very vague reference. What is it? A racial identity, a religious Christian identity, a national identity. Of course, this is very vague because the populists want to attract as many people as possible. So they cannot be too restrictive in defining what is the national identity of the European identity. And on the other side, yes, you have principles. You have principles. You have many second-generation migrants, of course. You have intellectuals. You have also religious people. Not all Christians are supporting the concept of Christian identity. So you have two sides, I agree with you, but the constituency on each side is quite complex, people with different origins.
I think we can discuss this for hours and hours, but that's all we have time for on this episode of Center Stage. Professor Roy, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts. Thank you very much for watching.